Hi, welcome to another episode of Straight from the Desk. In this video, we will explore the new Contrast paints from Games Workshop together. I received the paints from Games Workshop as a gift, and I was actually already invited quite some time ago together with my good friend Matt and 8 other painters to explore the new potentials of the paints over at the Games Workshop HQ. It was quite nice to actually test them before and to see how they work, and also see what different painters can actually achieve using those paints. I got those paints, as I said, from them, so it's not that I'm biased regarding the paints. I think all paints have their advantages and disadvantages, and definitely those paints are an interesting tool in your toolbox. I think they cannot replace like a whole painting system, and if you use them entirely, you will always kind of see that the model is washed. So I think it's always important to kind of hide your trace of which paints or mediums you've used to achieve a result. So in the end, it should always be just the painted model, and it shouldn't be like, oh, he used contrast paints for that, or oh, he used this and that pigment for that. It's quite important, I think, to be really able to fully enjoy the miniature, to not start separating elements on the figure, and to really think about the technical aspect of how it's been created. So we will see how we can incorporate those paints in our workflow. And before we go to the model, we'll first test the paints and see what they can do. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that video. Hope you like the new contrast paints as well. And yeah, let's have a look at them together. Alright, so before we go to the actual model, let's have like a small test here of the new contrast paints on a primed piece of plastic card. So the new set of colors also comes with 2 new shades of primer. This is the Gracie color, this is the Rathbone. This here is the Fine Surface Primer White from Tamiya, and this here is the Chaos Black. This here is just a bit of unprimed plastic card. So we have something to compare how those tones look. The idea of the colors is that they're translucent, so the 2 new primers add actually quite a huge variety to the paints, because we will see once we apply them that they appear quite different depending on what surface they're on. Also, the new set comes with those 2 shades here as opaque paints, so you can mix the colors accordingly to have like matching highlight tones. Alright, let's have a look at the palette. Here we have like the Rathbone as an opaque paint. Here we have the Gracie also as an opaque paint. Here we have the Technical Medium. It's clear and without pigments. It looks white while it's wet, or like kind of whitish, milky while it's wet. It's the Storm Shield Technical Medium. Here we have some Plague Bearer Flesh as a light color, as a light green. And here we have the Shyish Purple as one of the dark contrast paints to compare. So let's see how it looks when we just slap it on. If we apply it to the dilution helper, we can actually see it's relatively opaque. Okay, I went for like 2 different applications. The first one was like a bit messier with like a Z movement of the brush, applying the paint a bit thicker, which you can also see when we turn it around here. The paint really pools, and you can see how actually that slow drying time here of the paint when you apply it thicker helps to get like somewhat of a transition already in the paint. But you can also see it's surprisingly opaque. When we apply it here as more as a thin coat, we get like an even more even look of the paint, and it dries also a lot faster. So down here this is already dry, up here it still takes will take a little time. So you can see here when we compared on how the color looks, especially here on those two new primers, we can see that it's quite impressive of like how it actually appears quite a bit different here with that cooler gray or here with that warmer beige tone. Also on the white it reads quite differently. So let's have a look on how the plague bearer behaves. Same here. It's even actually quite a bit better to see with the light paint here that translucentness of the tones is really quite a benefit when it comes to the variety of shades that you can create. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting, especially for like the typical Games Workshop approach of painting, which is usually starting with like an opaque paint. Here you have as a beginning already something that plays with like translucentness of paint, and with the new addition of the two new primers we have a very interesting actually range of tones already. So let's apply some of the opaque paints here. So I'm cleaning my brush, just using some of that Rathbone. I'm just adding a bit here to the surface. Also some of that gray. And you can see, I mean, the paints are still wet, but the tone is very, very close. So I think this is really surprising that these are also so close, because often when you have paints from the rattle can and from the pot, they appear still quite different. Okay, I think we should wait until it's entirely dry to see how especially the thicker application of the paint looks before we start trying to shade these here with those two tones. Alright, so here we are with the paints being entirely dry, and there are a few very interesting things here to notice about when we're looking at our test plastic card. So first, these opaque paints really look tonal wise very close to the spray paint, but they are a bit matter and they appear like slightly darker. But I think they will be very good for the intended use, so they will be very good for blending. We will test that in a second. And you can see here I let it dry in like an angle, so we see how the pigments actually flow and dry, and they really leave like a coffee stain border, but I think that is also what it's intended to do. So they are supposed to gather in the recesses to create like a shading and to create like a darker so they're supposed to create like a darker shade in the shadows or on the lower side of the elements. So this is, I think, quite desired, but you have to be careful when they dry too thick, like what we can see here. They dry a little bit more glossy and also kind of splodgy, so you also don't want to overdo like the use of them on the surface. I think something like a small actually mistake here on where I masked the different spray paints is quite an interesting effect. We have almost something like a panel line here in between, and even in that one coat application, in the very thin one, we have like the pigments gathering here in the recesses and creating somewhat of a line. So I think this looks quite interesting, and we will see in a second how that looks on the model. First, let us test here on the surface how they blend with the opaque paints. So we're starting with that Plague Bearer flesh tone. We're adding it here on the surface, and we're adding a bit of the beige here next to it, and just wet blending the two here together. And we'll do the same here. With the gray. And yeah, I think you can already tell that that works quite well. Let's do that also with the purple. I like the look of that. It's interesting on how really, like, how different those shades appear depending on the highlights color that we use. And I'm pretty sure when we use something like pure white, like the titanium white, we will get like a very interesting look. Another thing that is interesting is actually to mention, like with that clear technical color, is it blends out quite a bit different if you use like that clear coat that we're doing now, because it has like the same consistency and the pigments really settle very equally. And if we do it just with water, it also works, but you can see something that the water doesn't have all that good of a grip to the surface, so it kind of pulls together and we are not getting like the exact same effect. So this is something that when I tried the paints for the first time, was something that freaked me out quite a bit, because I was naturally going back to the cup with the water to clean my brush and using that for feathering work and also for blending work. But the effect using the clear medium is quite a bit better. So this is something that you definitely have to get adjusted to. And yeah, let's slap some of the paint here on the model. Before we go to the actual model, let's do it on a test model to see how the pigments settle. All right. Okay, so here you are with one of the old Space Marines, just to test out how the paint actually dries on like a three-dimensional surface, because it's designed to dry in the crevices and give you like that shading without doing any manual work to it. So I think it's interesting to actually see what it does on the surface, and we will see on like later on we will investigate on the potential of the paints if you not use them just straight out of the pot, but a little bit more deliberate. All right, so I think we can just start here with our purple and really generously apply that here on the model. And I think it's quite important that you really actually cover the whole surface in more or less one go, and don't leave any like line on the areas like the plates here, because it really creates those tight marks, which is desired in the crevices, but you don't want it to be like too strong on the surface itself. But you can already see here, just with slapping it on there gives you already quite an interesting effect. I think this is also like a little bit one of the disadvantages of the paints is that you actually need plenty of the paint. So you know from like the other videos that I often have only like tiny bits of the paint actually on the wet palette, and I'm just using a little bit of it, but here for this paint, because of like the way of how it's designed and supposed to work, you just need to cover the miniature with actually plenty of the paint. And I'm just picking up some of that clear medium to thin down the paint a bit to see how that looks. Here on the water. Okay, we're letting that dry here, and while this dries, we can slap some of that green on another bottle. Okay, we'll just apply some of that Blade Bearer color also really generously here on our model to see how it looks and how it dries. Right, we're letting that dry and we'll be back to discuss the results. Alright. Okay, so this is how both of the figures look now once the paint is dry. And I really like the look that light plate bearer flash gave. Here with the shyish purple we can see like definitely a bit more of the tide marks. So let's have a look in detail. Okay, so I've zoomed in to check some details, and as I said, here on the light green this already worked better. You can see here it pulls really nicely also in all the gaps, and we get quite already like a defined look. Here you can see one problem that we have when we use just the wash as it is, just slapped on the model, that in areas here where paint collects and gathers we get those stronger marks. We can even see that a bit clearer here where we use the purple directly out of the pot. In areas like this here, or also in the back, we have these stronger tide marks. Nevertheless, I think it's quite an interesting look that we have, but this here is something that we definitely would want to avoid when we want to go for like a higher standard. Here where I used more of the medium, you can see that we really get like fine gradients, but also here where the paint gathered more brutally, here we have these stronger marks. So we have to definitely when we want to use also those darker paints directly out of the pot, I would advise you to just already incorporate like a little bit of the medium before to have a more translucent start, and then add maybe 2 layers or so. Also, a small problem is actually when you miss areas like this here, when you apply like a second coat of it. Let's go here for this already slightly thinned down version of the paint. I'll introduce that here. You can see we could cover it again, but then we would have already like quite a different level of overall coverage from those parts here. And this is also a little bit the issue when we want to highlight these areas now. Could do that just by adding here a bit of the wrath bone. Do like a small transition. We have that issue that we have like different intensities of the paint already on the surface, so we have different shades because it just dries lighter on those top areas, and it can be a little bit tricky to just get the exact same shade again. But you can see it also works when we use other paints, like the opaque paints, to blend things out a little. Okay, so we will not continue using the washes on those Space Marines, but we will jump more or less straight to the other model. Before we do that, let's have a look at the figure that I've actually painted at the Games Workshop HQ when I was there to test the paints earlier. This here is one of the Nurgle drones that I've actually started painting at the Games Workshop HQ when I was invited to test the paints among with really 10 very different artists. So it was a fantastic opportunity to see also how different people work with those paints. This here is a combination of loaded brushes and wet blending, and using the wash also on metallic paints. So I think the contrast paints have quite an interesting possibility to play with, but we will check that out in detail on the Cthulhu model. All right. Okay, here we are with the amazing Cthulhu head sculpted by Freeman for Dust. And this is just the head of quite a huge model, the Avatar of Cthulhu. And I really love the sculpt. This here is the limited resin head, and I got actually the model as a present from Paolo at Adepticon. So thanks for that. And yeah, we're going to check out the new contrast paints here on that, and I think it will work really fantastic with these nicely detailed and textured areas. So I hope I get all the names right, as these are also completely new for me. As a few of you have seen, I've been invited to test the paints over at the Games Workshop headquarters. So also the paints are sponsored by Games Workshop. They sent me the paints after that weekend to test them in depth, and this is what we'll do together now. Alright, so let's have a look at the palette. On the palette you can see my all-time favorite Schmincke Titanium White. Here we have some Militarium Green. Here we have some Black Bearer Flesh. Here we have some Voluptuous Pink. Up here is some Leviathan Blue. Here we have some Shyish Purple. This here is Magus Purple. And this here is Dark Oath Flesh. Here, this is, it looks white, but it's actually the clear medium of the contrast paints. And this is the Storm Shield medium. Alright. So let's start here with the head, but let's check the consistency first. So if we just take some of that Militarium Green here, just put a bit here on the surface, we can see it's quite thick in consistency, but it's not opaque. So if we just add like a film of that, we can tint an area, and you can see it really collects here at the edges, like a typical wash. I like the range of tones that they have. They are quite intense, so let's see how far we get with starting with the green. Alright, so as I said, we're starting with the green, and we're applying actually plenty of that here on the surface. Cleaning the brush, picking up some of that clear medium for an area where I already want to fade it out. Also here in an area where I want to have the highlight later on. I don't want the color to be all that intense already in the beginning. Okay, and we're also adding it here in the dark shadow area. Not all that much on the brush. Okay, and again here just with the clear medium already, like creating a bit of a transition, so we don't have like a hard edge later on. Here the rest I will just clean that off with water in the brush. And we're continuing here in the same manner. I've used first Chaos Black spray paint out of the can, and then spray painted it with the new Wrathbone from the top. And I really like that, actually the two tones that they've created. The light gray and also that beige here, because it's really a nice addition. I'm not really a big fan of the Corex white. I often had problems with it that turned out like slightly grainy when I tried. So for white I often used like the Tamiya white spray paint, the fine surface primer out of the can, and yeah, that is here now like a very nice addition. They dry a bit better, at least to my experience so far, and yeah, I like that you have like two tones that really influence like the color and how it dries, and this here already I think looks really quite interesting. But you can see here where it just dried like that, it left quite like a stain here on the surface. So I think it's really important that if you want to work on a surface like that, that you really cover like the whole surface. Otherwise you leave quite some big tite marks, or as I tried it here to the top, just already work with like that clear medium to feather things out already a bit. Okay, and again with that clear medium. Okay, I really like the effect already here that we have, but I think we will really start to see the advantages here once we have the other tones coming in place. So I want some of the tentacles definitely to be more pink as well, so that's why we have the pink purple setup here on the palette. So I will continue with some of that dark oak flesh and start to introduce it here. And the nice thing is, really, while the tones are wet, we can really blend them together very nicely. And we're continuing now with like these different purple shades here. So this one here is the shyish purple, and we will use that here on this tentacle. And you can see like this is super dark, and there's like quite a strong impact here on the color. So I'm using some of that pink here to the front, not too much on the brush. And with some of that darker green, you can create like already like quite an interesting blend here. Okay, continuing here with that pink. Just clean the brush here with water, and I'm working with some of that, not too much, but with some of that medium here to get like a better transition to the other side. And I want to introduce some of that flesh tone here. Okay, and some of that Leviathan blue here. Also quite a dark and intense tone. And it's really surprising how, like, I think actually the dark tones look. They create like a super intense look. And we have also like the Schmincke Titanium white in place to create like more manual painted highlights later on. So for now we're just introducing like the funky color transitions here. Okay, and we will just continue here with these various shades on the tentacles, and you can see it's also nice when we build up like a second layer to intensify some of the lighter tones as well. When you paint an area like that, not only with the washes, but or not only with the contrast paints, but in general you have to, I think, be a little bit cautious of like how you use the paints, and I try to introduce the paints to get like a nice harmonic color setup, but also to be able to differentiate here these tentacles in that mess of flowing tentacles, just to get like to help the eye a little. So I made sure that this one here, the blue continues here, then turns into some purple, so that it's like a little bit easier to follow. We continue with that. Okay, and we continue like that, and we'll be back for the next step. Alright? Okay, I continued on the other tentacles, as you can see, and I think the look is pretty cool. From far away it looks already pretty impressive. I like the really strong color shifts that you can create with that. If we look a little in detail, let me zoom in for that. Okay, so if we zoom in, we can see there is a small problem with these like these areas where the color hasn't fully covered, or where we have like still bits of the foundation shining through. So this is definitely looking good from far, but we definitely need to do some adjustments work. Before we tackle that, let's continue here with these green tones on the head. to get a nice transition with that. Okay, we'll continue with that lighter shade here. Okay, we'll continue with the Plague Bearer Flesh and apply that here more in the areas of the highlight where we tint down our green before to just get like a more intense green. Down here we're adding a bit more of the military green. We're also taking some of that medium here to thin it down on the top. And here we're really working our brush back and forth, so we don't leaving some of the deep crevices here and still in the primer. So sometimes there are like tiny air bubbles, so working the brush a bit back and forth can help to reduce those little air bubbles in the recesses. A little bit with the purple here where we have that stain. We can just correct that, I think, already now to get like a bit of like a transition to the purple here. Okay, I like the look of that, and I think for the next step we have to make sure that it's entirely dry, because I want to introduce also some other shades here, so it's not all that entirely green. But we're giving that quite a bit time to dry actually in the studio today. It's rather cool, and the paint needs quite a bit of time to really settle. I tried it out. It's not ideal to use the blow dryer, because if you just let the pigments dry naturally, they would set a little bit nicer in the recesses. Okay, this is how the figure looks now with the Plague Bearer Flesh dried, and I like the look. The contrast paint is dried entirely, and it actually turned out not too glossy, and I really like the look. So I think this is something that Games Workshop would consider what they call now battle ready. So if we just pick out the eyes and some details, I think this would already look pretty cool on the table, but we are not here to do something that is only enjoyable on the table. So let's see what we can achieve using the contrast paint a little different, and let's start detailing those things here out using a smaller brush, a Winsor & Newton size 1. So you can see here that mixed slightly with the pink here on the palette. So let's apply some fresh light green here. Okay, so we have the light green here, and let's take some of that, mix it a little bit here, the tone that we've been using also in that snout area, and let's pick up a little bit of white on the tip of the brush, and let's start to introduce like a stronger highlight here. Okay, turned out quite nice. We just want to make sure that we don't end up like too pale in our highlights. So we can refine some of these areas later on, also using a bit more, again, the contrast paint as a wash. But for now we will just start continuing here. We'll just start detailing out areas of interest. So that snout here is definitely something where people will look at, so we're detailing that out bit by bit. Not too much white on the brush. Okay, a bit more with the pink here. Also from the other side, not too much white. And you can see really how nice we can add also more controlled highlights. And as the contrast paints are really rather translucent, we only need a tiny bit of white and a little bit more contrast paint in the back of the brush. Okay, here where we have an area where we have already like a mixed tone of the green and the pink, we also have to have that in the back of the brush. Very nice to one side. Now softening it out to the other side. I like the look of that. Alright, and we'll continue picking out our highlights like that, also on prominent areas like this here for sure. So again, using some of that pink together with some white. And I really think by just adding like a few areas of controlled highlights or a few places of controlled highlights, we can create really like a very nice painted look here on these details as well. And if we would have like a strong highlight like this here, we would also find a highlight here in that area. Continuing here with the purple and a bit of the pink as a mixed tone. And yeah, we're continuing here bit by bit, trying to like put a stronger focus point here on this front part of the tentacle, but we also have to continue here with the highlight in that lower area, not all that intense, because we want to keep the attention more to the front. Wipe off the extra amount of white on the brush, and I'm just carefully now softening out these small dots of white that I did on the surface. And these dots can also really help to get like a rather glossy look here on the surface. Okay, also with some of that dark old flesh and a bit of white. What we will also do is we will create just a highlight shade here pre-mixed on the palette. that pink. So we can pick out some of these smaller, more like line-like textures. And combine that again here with a loaded brush. Alright, we'll continue detailing out some of these areas here, just in the very same manner, and we'll be back to detail out certain focus points a little bit better. Alright. Okay, so as you can see, I continued with the highlights on the tentacles and also moved along and painted a little bit here on the snout itself and added like small tiny highlights, and also continue detailing this half here a little. So let's continue here to see how that goes. Also here how a loaded brush with the contrast paint and some Schmincke Titanium White works on large elements like this. So here we have these kind of like veins on the skull shape. So we have like two round elements here, and we want to add like a bigger highlight to it, but still like keep some of these veins here visible and darker. So we're mixing a mixture of these two greens, wiping off the brush a little so we don't have too much paint in the brush, picking up some white, and we're first introducing like a small highlight here. I'm trying not to go over the edges here. Another segment. we're continuing here segment by segment. This was a little bit too much white on the brush. The nice thing is here the medium gives you actually quite a bit of drying time, and you can just adjust the blending really to like your needs and can push it in both directions. We've been mainly using it here for a lot of brushes, but I think you can also really easily do wet blending with it, and I think layering is like a little bit complicated as the paint is not opaque, and it's kind of hard to remix the exact same shade because you get already that pre-shading done with the first wash, and then you have like different levels of brightness on the surface, and that can be kind of tricky to really get the same tone. So here we are like pushing the highlight back and forth and expanding it a little, so we get that oval shape that we also have here in that big volume. Also here, some of these smaller bumps and lumps that are more prominent, you can pick those out. Just tapping next to the small dot that I've just created. Looks good. Yeah, I think for this one we need definitely like a better transition here to these small wrinkles. So we're taking like a mixed tone of the two greens, and we're mixing it here to the side with a little bit of white, wiping off the brush so it doesn't run out of the brush uncontrolled, and we're using that here to pick out some of these wrinkles. A bit brighter, using more white. Okay, and we're continuing here with our highlights. Also on these eyelids. We're basically highlighting everything that is facing upwards, so there's a little bit of detailing work here that definitely needs to be done. You don't have to highlight everything to the same extent, but it's important to really work with those hotspots, areas of interest where you definitely look. So the eye usually also checks here for facial details such as the eye, so definitely make sure to invest some time to detail out the areas around the eyes. Here with a bit of that pinker shade. Okay, so far so good. I really like the look so far. We definitely need to still do some detailing work. So I want to add a little bit of color variation, and I'm adding some of the wildwood to the palette. Wildwood is a very nice and dark brown, and we will use that here in some of the prominent areas here to get like a nice shadow tone. We're first placing it, cleaning the brush, and this time we're just feathering it out with water. And I really like that effect when you add like another second color to like the green here, for example, to just darken those shadows and the color variation a little bit with the brown. I think that's always like a nice touch because it enriches the color quite a bit once you have like a second color next to it just to compare it to. The eye really reads it quite a bit better. We'll continue here with our highlight tone that like smaller detailed highlights. And we're continuing with the eyes using some of that Leviadon blue and some white. Make sure it's not too much white. And we're adding this first, the main reflection dot here. Then wiping off the brush a little and creating a mixed tone, like a darker mixed tone with the blue. Okay, picking up a bit more pure white because those reflections here in the eye should really be white and prominent because the eyes should also be in like a glossy environment like this, still like the most reflective part. Okay, just still next to it here. Okay, and if we have these eyes in here, you can really see how they shine out. We will do that to the other side as well. Okay, we will also continue here on this side using some of the blue and a tiny bit of white. Okay, I like the look of that. I think we can still adjust and clean up some of the shadow works, but that will follow in the next step. And yeah, I really like the look so far. Can't wait to finish off that wonderful head. All right. Okay, so here we are with the base colors all placed and highlighted, and as I said before, we will do some adjustments regarding the shadows. But before we do that, let's pick out some other details, such as like these small, kind of like pointy teeth-like elements on the tentacles, and also that nasty little mouth here. So you can see for those adjustments work, I rearranged the palette, adding mainly dark shadow tones. It's kind of hard to see on the palette, but here we have some of the Schmincke Titanium White. Here we have some Chaos Black, both regular paints. The other paints are contrast paints. Here we have some Black Templar paint. It looks black, but if we pull it out, we can see it's like a kind of bluish black. Here we have the Militarium Green. Here we have some Wildwood, and here we have the clear technical Storm Shield Medium. We'll first start using just the black. We're using that between heavy and medium base tone consistency. And we're just using that to pick out here these teeth. And I want to have them really quite different and just black. So we're not introducing for these details, we're not really introducing a new color here, because we already have like a lot of colors going on. So sometimes it's good to just keep like a neutral color for these additional details here. You could also just leave them in the color that they are and highlight them separately, but I think a little bit of differentiation here is quite good. Okay, so here we are with the teeth all painted in black, and you can see I've already added like a few highlights here on these just to test it out and see how it looks contrast wise. And yeah, let's do these here now together. For the teeth, we started with black and we're continuing here with the Black Templar, wiping it off a little so we don't have too much on the brush, and adding a tiny bit of white. And we're first adding small dots of white to the tip to indicate like the maximum highlight. And I really love those small, super bright highlights because they add a lot of like sparkle to the surface, and they add also quite a bit of contrast to these areas. But we still want to definitely blend them out a little, and that's what we're doing in this next step. And just using the color in the back of the brush and the white from the tip to get like a gradient done. Just by dabbing here on the surface, we get like a very nice little but very dramatic transition. First dabbing here more with the front, and then dabbing a little bit more with the back of the brush. Just wiggling the brush around a little so that the white and the black Templar color already mix a little in the brush, so we're starting more with like a very light gray instead of like the pure white. Yeah, like that. And we are doing the same thing also here to these small teeth here. Yeah. Let's also do some extra detailing here on those, on that crab-like claw, and just have water in the back of the brush and black to the front of the brush, and we're just introducing it here. And because we have the water in the back of the brush, we can directly feather it out. Again to the other claw, water in the back of the brush, black to the front, and we're doing that just with the Chaos Black. I think we could also have done it with the contrast paint, but I just want to make sure that the tip of the claw here is really opaque and black. Okay, we're using some of that wildwood here from the contrast paints and also some white to create like a lighter brown. And we're using that here to highlight the claw. And we're also using it here on the surface itself to create like very fine lines, similar to those that we find on horns. First darker ones and now brighter ones. We're also adding them here to the top, and we're using a bit of pure white for really like the small highlights on the tip. Okay, and we're doing the same to the other side as well. Okay, now we have those grain lines, and I want to continue and re-establish that darker tip here, and we'll do that with the contrast paints, and we're pushing it here to the top so the pigments gather more on the top and we can still see those lines shining through. Yeah, I like the look of that. So let's see what we need adjustment wise. We still need to add like a few highlights here, but I will do that off cam before we, oops. Okay, so let's see what we still need. I think we just need to add like a few highlights here on these areas. This here is detailed out enough. Yeah, I will do that off cam before we're back to readjust some of the shadows. All right. Okay, I said before I want to readjust some of the shadows, and there are different opportunities here and or different ways in how we could adjust the shadows, and I decided to go for like dark brown, to use that as like a general shadow tone on all these elements, and you could also go for like using darker green tones here and darker purple tones, for example here, but I think using one tone is really quite useful because it can help to draw some of the elements closer together as well. And we'll do that using some of that wildwood color here. I really love that tone, and I think this here is just really good to define some of these areas here clearly as areas that would receive shadows. Also here to the side, using some of that storm shield of that clear medium to draw it out. think this step is actually quite an important step. It might not really change a whole lot like the general view of the miniature, but it can help really to pull things together color-wise and also boost some of the contrast that we find and help to separate the tones and the like elements like the tentacles, for example, here in an area like that, to just get like a sharper definition here. So in here a bit more generous. So I'm just using the clear here to push it back a bit. And also here, for example, we have like a very strong color gradient from that pink over purple to that browner shade. And back here I want to introduce also a bit of the green to connect the tentacles here a bit more. So just adding the militarium green here and pushing it a bit here back into the recesses. Careful that we're not adding too much. So again with that clear medium. The medium is a bit funny because it's like slightly whitish while it's wet. It's a little hard to judge what it's really doing, but once it's dry, it's completely clear, and the effect is actually really cool. It's just a little hard to actually judge while it's wet. So I think that's definitely something that you have to get used to when you use these new paints. Also, it's really a little bit, I don't know, daunting to just slap the paints on a bit more generously. So this is really something that you have to get used to when you use the new contrast paints. But I really think the possibilities are actually great to do something that is rich in color and really settles nicely and super even in like a textured surface, but also on flat surfaces it looks quite good, as we saw in the beginning. Okay, so we let that dry and we're good to go, and enjoy that head of our Cthulhu here. Alright, hope you enjoyed that little introduction into contrast paints, and can't wait to see how we actually integrate them into the regular workflow and see where and why we use them. Alright, thanks for watching, thanks for your support.